You're listening to the Cantina Cast, your home for thought-provoking Star Wars talk. Join Albert and Jonesy in breaking down the latest news, trailers, movies, and of course, your favorite characters from a galaxy far, far away.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cantina Cast. My name is Albert Padilla, and this is episode 255, Vader Book 1. That's right, we're finally doing it. We are taking a small step into a larger world here, and we're going to be doing something we've talked about doing for quite some time, and that's looking back at some of the more interesting Star Wars arcs in the comic book form. So, and joining me tonight is the dark horse of the Cantina Cast. He is a true marvel in the world of Star Wars podcasting, and there was absolutely nothing I could come up with for DC Comics. So please welcome to the show, Jonesy. Jonesy, how's it going tonight?
I'm going well. I'm the Stan Lee to your Jack Kirby.
Oh, hey, wow.
How about
Excelsior.
that?
That's a good one.
Excelsior.
Yeah, so we're in the midnight oil tonight on this show. We had Halloween, so we had some festivities to take care of, but now that's over. I'm sugared up and ready to go. How's it going? Anything new with you?
No, not really. Lots of thunderstorms in our area again. So Halloween was a bit of a wash, but I'm looking forward to another great weekend. We're going to be doing a little traveling this weekend. So you won't see me around on social media or anything like that. So,
yeah. All right. Well, good luck. Safe travel. Let's do this. We've got some news we'll get into, and then we'll kind of talk about the Vader arc. But first up, we're just kind of a follow-up from last week. John Williams is recovering, so this is all good news. And I think when it first broke, I think you and I both talked about last week that, no, this is, it's a little scary to hear something like that, especially with somebody that old. But all signs looks like he's pulling through and he's headed home soon. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what the latest sounds like. So good news there.
Yeah. So yeah, good. It's always good when it's crazy. Like obviously as we're getting older, some of these folks that we just take for granted will always be there, are starting to kind of fall to the wayside, unfortunately. So, and I'm not trying to be insensitive,
but the selfish part of you is like, John, you got one more movie to score, dude.
Yeah, dude. Yeah. What about me?
What about Indiana Jones? I mean, we're going to do Indy 5.
Yeah.
We've got a slate in front of us, buddy. We gotta have you around for that.
Yeah. So all good news there with Mr. Williams. The another thing we've got is so this is interesting. The podcast and blog links were removed from StarWars.com. Now, to be fair, I don't know that I ever actually went out and looked at those. I knew they were out there, but I never looked at the list. I don't know who was the curator of that list or how things got on, things came off, that kind of thing. But I know it did kind of send some ripples through the Star Wars fan community. And is this a sign of things to come, or what do you think the motivation was behind this?
I mean, it has to be the social media aspect of it and some of the polarizing conversations that have happened throughout podcasts, but also online through various mediums. And that's unfortunate that they don't feel comfortable advertising, I guess, for podcasts, just because they want to make sure that it's clear that we don't speak for Disney or Lucasfilm or the Star Wars community. And while it's disappointing, I understand that. And with the Chuck Wendig fallout and some of the reactions there as well, it's just kind of snowballing. So this makes sense to just dial it back. They didn't have to do it in the first place. It was nice. Do I wish they would have it there? Yeah, I think it's great. It's great for people to be able to, find really good, high quality content that they feel represents their brand really well. And if for some reason, if we're not doing that anymore, then that's on the community, and that's every right for them to do that. So again, there's no official word. They just took it down and put basically a disclaimer out there that we're all, freelance. We're not any part of Lucasfilm. Clearly, we've got a disclaimer at the end of the show that says the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. All things said, just because and this is maybe not too surprising because it's kind of the world that we live in, the state that we live in, state of affairs, for the most part. And certainly there have been some of the creators, and not just in the Star Wars community, but if you follow comics or other movies or other IPs that are huge, you know, there's always controversy with some of the creators now and their social media posts and, you know, affiliations and all that. So this is probably just safer for them in the long run. And things are a little different. It's not like, you know, 15, 20 years ago where the interwebs were, you had limited places to go to find some of this stuff. It's probably more readily accessible now. There's a lot of different ways that you can find content.
It's the way you find content now.
Yeah, right. So yeah.
Unfortunate, but yeah, like you said, it's a harsh reality of the world we live in right now. And that's why it's very important for everyone to be very cognizant of what you say and what you want to represent yourself as well as your community. Just like we do with the Cantina Cast, we want to make sure that we broadcast a certain message out there, and that's one that's generally positive. We can be critical in a very critical way, but we're not going to lash out at anybody.
Yeah, we're not going to be jerks.
Right, yeah. So that's the way that we roll. Yeah.
That's how I roll. All right. And then the other thing, I'm actually pretty excited about this. Lego Star Wars All-Stars is coming October 29th. This is like
there's already 2 episodes out. Have you watched it?
I haven't seen
as
them
of
yet.
We're recording this, we've got 2.
That's right. Yeah,
they're only like 2 or 3 minutes.
Oh, really? They're not. I thought they'd be like 30 minutes in length.
No, they're really short little clips, and I won't spoil it too much for you. But basically, they're following Roger, who is a battle droid.
Yeah,
on his it's basically like a memoir almost. They're cute. They're just a couple of minutes. There's nothing special about it, but it's somewhat amusing.
Yeah, and that's what I was gonna say. They you can bash you all you want, the movies, the comics, the animated series, the cartoons, that kind of thing. But there's one constant that's always been there, and that's the Lego. In my opinion, the Lego Star Wars stuff. It's good for a few laughs. It doesn't take itself seriously at all. It never has. And that's been true of all the Lego brand, the Lego animated series, all of them, really, regardless if it's Star Wars or DC, Marvel. They really poke fun at themselves and you know, the IPs and that kind of thing. So, but it's always just fun. It's always a good, lighthearted thing. And, you know, you don't have to worry about canon and whether or not it aligns, because my understanding is this is kind of a big potpourri, eclectic collection of characters from different timelines and all that, which is, you know, true to the Lego Star Wars brand. But I'm excited about it. I can't wait to see these. They're always a lot of fun to watch. It's fun. I think it's right up your alley. And again, it's only 2 or 3 minutes. So people can just jump in and jump out, and you can wait till you get a bunch of them and watch it in a big block. But yeah, they're on Disney's YouTube, the Disney XD YouTube channel. And so they're free. You can get them anywhere. They're also on the Disney Now app. I think we got a new episode of Resistance out as well, which I have not seen. I think what we talked about doing was maybe coming back after these have queued up a little bit, maybe coming and touching base and on those and how they're going. So although we do have a new episode, we're not going to really dive into that, at least not on this show. But, you know, again, down the road here, we may come back and visit some of those. Right. We want to see how some of the arcs, you know, start to play themselves out a little bit so we can go in. Each individual episode is not going to have a lot of stuff to dig into each time, but where it warrants it, or until we get a nice arc or we get something of a major milestone, we'll come back and revisit that, though. Yeah. All right. So with that, we will be right back.
You know what's not smart? Making the lottery the centerpiece of your retirement plan. But you know what is smart? Going to ZipRecruiter.com/Cantina to hire the right person. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful matching technology scans thousands of resumes, identifies people with the right skills, education, and experience for your job, and actively invites them to apply, so you get qualified candidates fast. That's why ZipRecruiter is rated #1 by employers in the U.S. And right now, my listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free at this exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter.com/Cantina. That's ZipRecruiter.com/Cantina. And once again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/Cantina. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, let's do this. We are talking. So, first off, when we mentioned, I guess, earlier this year, I should say, when we talked about doing more with the Cantina Cast, this is something I think you and I had both agreed that at some point it would make sense, because we were both fans of the comic series, to start getting into them more. It's a lot easier for us to do that now, simply because they are, you know, canon. And even though the stories, like we've mentioned, may not have, you know, maybe not pull some of the bigger threads within the trilogy themselves or the movies, that kind of thing, there's enough here, I think, for us to discuss. And
I guess what I've always found with the comic books is, at least since the Disney era, is it does change. At least it has for me. It does change my perspective on some of the characters, even if it's just slightly. And I can't say that was true of the EU stuff, because again, kind of like in the last episode we talked about it, or I think on the listener feedback show, sometimes that the EU stuff was just, it was there, and if it changed and if I didn't like it, at the end of the day, I could walk away and go, well, it didn't really matter because it's not true canon. It wasn't like the G level canon type stuff. So,
Right.
when we started looking at the comic books, we obviously have a lot to choose from. There's the main Star Wars line. There's the the 2 Vader arcs. There's the Aphra stuff, and on and on and on. But I think we landed on this one just because there's, I guess there are some really significant things that came out from it, both of the arcs. And so this is going to be our first tippy toe into the water of comics, so to speak. And I think depending on how this goes, and you certainly how some of the main titles play out, you may see more of this coming down the road. So I'll just lead in with that. But I guess, Jonesy, for you on this particular arc, was this an arc that when it came out, did you follow it from the get-go, or did you wait for a couple issues to rack up and then pick up like the trade, or once those stories have been collected?
No, I subscribed to both the Star Wars main title and Darth Vader right away.
Yeah.
They had a lot of hype going into them because they talked that this was going to be right after A New Hope, going in, this time between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. And it was an interesting time period because we didn't know a lot about what happened. We hear in the movies, we get a little bit of, at the bounty hunter Ord Mantell and, things like that, but we don't get any real story there. We didn't understand how the Empire recovered so quickly, or what their strategy was to where they got to Empire and they seemed stronger than ever after being dealt what we thought was a devastating blow after the Death Star was destroyed. So when these books were announced and we were going to be able to see these stories, I was really excited. So I went ahead and subscribed right away to both of them. And so when we talked about this, I was like, man, I actually have these. Some of the newer ones I'm a little behind on, but these I've got every single issue. There were only 25 in this very first Vader comic. And of course the main title is still going, and I'm several issues behind there, but no, I was on top of these from the get-go.
Right. So for those of you that are not following the comic series, you can pick these up if you subscribe like to the Marvel Unlimited thing. You can pick them up there. Those are all available. If you're trying to get the newer ones, the 2017 arc, I think there's like a 6-month wait before they become available as part of that paid monthly subscription.
Right.
But,
I think they're on Comixology Unlimited as well for the Comixology
right.
users. Yeah, I'm a huge Comixology user. It's just my preferred platform, but they're on the Unlimited there, and same deal. You get that silly delay.
Yeah. So this is so what we're going to be talking about. So basically there are 2 Vader series that have come out since Disney took over. There's the 2015, so Vader 2015, which is what we'll be covering tonight, at least the first 6 issues of that. And there is another one that came out in 2017. I would have to say the 2017 is probably more intriguing. It's got some heavier threads there than maybe this one, than this series. But nonetheless, there are some pretty good. There's some good stuff in this one. 25 issues. It ran from February 2015 to October of 2016. And like Jonesy mentioned, these are set just right after the events of A New Hope. So the Death Star has been blown up. Vader knows that there is a Force-sensitive person that is responsible for all of this. Has not been made aware to him that it's actually his son, Luke Skywalker, which we'll get to in a little bit here. And it's really cool because they have been weaving this story in and out of the main title, the Star Wars title that came out when Disney took over, again, which is still going. And we'll get to maybe just very slightly, briefly a little bit later, but they found a way to kind of weave into even like Rebels. So it's cool. Again, it's crossing a lot of these different platforms, and it's kind of threading in and out without really pulling any of the heavier proverbial strings of those titles and other storylines. So
do you like it when comics do this, where they have crossovers between the different series?
I do, and I can't say that I'm so blind to it because this is like something I grew up with. I've been an avid collector. I have thousands of comics sitting in a room that my wife despises to this day. and I don't know any different, I guess, so to speak. Like crossovers, I know what they do, and all they do is make me spend even more money because I'm trying to buy all of the issues to make sure that I've got the full series. I've got to have every single side story, even though it may not have any impact on the main thread of that particular crossover event. I usually go out and buy all of them as well. So I actually do like it, and I don't know if that's really the right thing. I don't know if that is a sane thing to even say. I just don't know any different. So. What about you? Are you a big fan of this crossover type stuff?
No, usually I'm not. The reason why I don't like is for the reason why you said, is that you get these really off-topic comics or these stories that don't tie into the main story. I remember when the Civil War series was going on in the Marvel world, that it just, man, you had to buy tons of different books. But this one worked better because, and maybe this is because I was subscribing to both at the same time. It didn't matter too much, but it only weaved in and out of these two books. I didn't have 3, and then that went to 5, and then it went to 7, and it was across all these different character lines where I had to get the complete story in this really roundabout way. At least this was pretty focused. I didn't have as much of a problem with this one because it was, I had them already. But it made sense for them to bleed over into one another because you got these different perspectives. I think that was what was cool about this, is you had a timeline where everyone was moving along the same path at the same rate, but you had the Star Wars series focusing on our heroes, and then we had the Vader side focusing on the Vader and on the Empire side, which I thought that was really cool, getting the different perspectives of what was happening at that moment in time.
I mean, I would say if there were, if there were 20 or 30 titles under the Star Wars umbrella, that would probably be a different story if they try to weave something into every single one of them. Then we're getting what Marvel does basically with their the Marvel universe itself. But yeah, I mean, to your point, there's really not that many titles out, so it was pretty limited in scope in terms of what you actually had to go out there and to get the full story. I guess the only feedback item I would have, since we're on the topic, I didn't like in the Star Wars series, they don't reference the books themselves. Like, there was always like an asterisk, like editorial asterisk saying,
yes,
go see comic, whatever, blah, 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 blah. And they didn't do that in the series for whatever reason. And to be quite honest, I don't know if that's even a thing anymore. It was just, a few years ago. So it hasn't been that long.
I wish they'd bring it back, because the other comics today in the Star Wars, they're all calling back and referencing certain items or characters or stories. And that is so useful. I know it takes you out of the moment, so I can understand why they may not want to use it, but man, they're so useful to have, to say, for more on this character, go check out issue 22 of Poe Dameron or whatever it is. And man, I wish they would bring that back. I was actually thinking that the other day, because this series has, there's other comics now that call back to these stories. And I went to look at those, and there's no reference between them. And it's really frustrating if you're a newer reader getting into the comics and you just pick one up off the shelf today at the store. Man, trying to get back and fill in the gaps is really tough, and you miss out on some cool little Easter eggs.
Yeah, it probably even takes me more out of the story than had they just put that in there, because I immediately drop the comic and then go start looking for online, trying to figure out what they're referencing. And it's this book. All right. Yeah. But all right. Anyway, so that's enough of the setup. Let's get into the comic. So we'll kind of start. We're not going to really take this comic by comic and kind of break down panel by panel, that kind of thing. What we chose to do is really just kind of focus on some of the main plot points and storylines that are kind of happening throughout the comic, and then really just try to put some, some theory, speculation, questions that you would come to expect from us here at the Cantina Cast around some of that stuff, and just kind of, provide some different perspectives and get some opinions on how we think those things should play out, or whether, they went the way we thought they did, or that kind of thing. So, before we get started, I will say, let's give credit to the creative team. So the writer was Kieran Gillen, who I didn't follow much of. I know he did like a British pop comic book for a number of years, and I forget the title now. And I knew he did that because it was, well received and that sort of thing. So it was very surprising that he came to this to do Star Wars of all things. Salvador Larroca is the artist. I'm a huge fan of his ever since he was on the X-Men. He did a number of X-Men titles that I followed. So, and I have to say, without getting into all of the artistic type stuff, but I thought he did a really good job with the comic. There's a couple panels, a couple things that don't always look right to me, but for the most part, I think his work is pretty good. It's very clean, which I really like quite a bit. The colorist was Edgar Delgado. Letterer is VC's Joe. I'm going to scroll these names up. Caramagna.
There you go.
The cover artist is Adi Granov, and he's done a crap ton of Marvel comic covers for everything from Iron Man to this to X-Men. And then editor was Jordan B. White. So if those names mean stuff to you, great. If not, we'll move on.
Many of these names are prevalent through all of the Star Wars books right now, through all of the comics. So these names come up over and over and over. If you get into the comics at all, these are going to be names that you see frequently.
Which is kind of cool because they're keeping all the same creative talent around, which I think is good for the title to do so. So again, we're going to focus on the first 6 issues of the 2015 Vader series, and really this arc is just called Vader, like not too original, very simple. Later on, it gets into some different stuff, but this one's called Vader. And I guess just kind of initial thoughts, about the arc. What did you find that was really interesting, or I guess what stood out for you the most, in this particular one?
Well, there was one thing that grabbed me early on was the Vader Palpatine dynamic after the destruction of the Death Star. What the questions I had going into it were, what was that relationship like? What was the fallout from it? What were those conversations like? And what were Palpatine's reactions from, with this, presumably failure on Vader's part? And then of course you kind of jump to what we see as the end of the arc is more of how does Luke start factoring into this? How does Vader find out who Luke is and start to put the pieces together as we get into Empire Strikes Back? And so those were the 2 things I was most interested in with this arc going into it. I didn't expect to get some extra stuff in the middle, especially some of the new characters as well. But those were the 2 main, kind of the main story points that I wanted to really understand what was going on.
So let me ask you something, just kind of out the gate here. Did you feel like we get a different side of the Emperor in that relationship? Like it just seems like they make no mistake about it. Even in the very beginning in the crawls that we get in every one of the comics, they keep calling out the fact that Vader's failed. I mean, they call him a failure. They call him all kinds of different. There's a lot of different adjectives that they use here to kind of just really hit home the fact that in the Emperor's eyes, at least, that he's a complete and total failure. It just seemed like it was It just seemed like it was maybe if this was no, don't get me wrong, it was a big event. He let the droids go. They let the Millennium Falcon go. The Death Star blew up, right? That's kind of a 3-strike thing right there.
Right.
But do you feel like there was anything else that maybe we don't have in terms of storyline in that 20-year span between the end of Revenge of the Sith when becomes Vader up until when the Death Star plan, I guess let's just call it Rogue One, and that right around that time frame? Do you feel like there was anything in there that also kind of just built upon this the disdain or the disappointment that we see from the Emperor in Vader, or do you think that was enough, those 3 events coupled together within a very short span of time that led the Emperor to really kind of just, he belittles him almost to the extent of like, Snoke and Kylo Ren, right? It's very similar.
Yeah, no, I think those would be enough, but the fact that the rebels have chipped away at the Empire, and all of a sudden, well, I don't even say all of a sudden, but they've been growing in strength, and we get a little bit of this flavor from some of the things that Palpatine says when he's calling out that this isn't a nuisance anymore. Like now they're legit. The Rebel Alliance is an actual threat now. They never have they been so close to this tipping point of it completely falling apart and going into utter chaos. And so for the Emperor to admit that is, man, that's got to be the worst thing. That's like a worst case scenario for him, who has plotted meticulously for decades to come to this point and to quote unquote stabilize the Empire. And for this to happen really somewhat quickly, but probably chipping away over time, he's probably looking at Vader and holding him responsible, partially because there's no others to hold responsible because they're all dead now. But
yeah. Well, and he makes that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but the Emperor makes that comment in the comic book. He says, he talks about, I forget some of the people that he rattles off, but some of the folks that were on the Death Star.
Yeah,
he mentions
Tarkin, Mahdi.
Yeah, Tarkin, Mahdi, they're all dead. Unfortunately, dude, you're the only one that's still alive, so you're going to feel the wrath of me and everything that, at this point. So, yeah. Sorry,
it was fantastic. Yeah, the quote is, "Oh, you are truly the chosen one, Vader, chosen to be the one responsible." And it was harsh. I mean, and this is in one of those things, like you were saying, he just belittles Vader and is just belligerent towards him. And he even comes back and says, you're a blunt instrument, far better to be wielded than to wield. And it's just, man, I mean, he is just saying you are basically worthless. He's basically lost faith in Vader at this point. And what's difficult, and I want your take on this, do you really think that's true? Or do you think that he's doing this to rile Vader up in order to, to motivate him to go out there and do something about it? Or do you really feel like this is really Palpatine's, feeling? He's just laying it out on the table.
Yeah. I mean, there's a part of me that thinks, so I kind of threw that, and I threw the question out there to you about, do you think these events were enough, or do you think there was more there? I would have to think in the span of 20 years, there are probably a number of other things that have happened, whether they were big, significant, or not. But I would guess there were other things that happened where we maybe Palpatine may have treated Vader the same way. And going to what we're seeing now, what we're talking to address your question just now, I almost feel like this is a process for him that, he doesn't want Vader to feel lax, or doesn't want that hate. It doesn't want the anger to suddenly be extinguished. He wants to keep that kindled, keep it going. And part of it is Palpatine's just pure evil. Don't get me wrong. But I think part of it is just ensuring that his apprentice or student or whatever it is that he considers Vader, because I don't even know at this point what he really considers him as. But I think it's to make sure that he stays, on his A game and his wits are about him, and the Sith drive and feed off of the anger and the hate. And so if he's not getting that from, where else is he going to get all that from, right? The Emperor seems like the only true source to ensure that power, to ensure that rage, that anger, and all that continues. Because really, there's nobody that can contest Vader that we know of, at least not in this era. Right. He's not getting his butt whipped in anywhere else. So yeah, I think partly it's the Emperor's character, but I think partly it's, I don't want to say it's a game, but it's certainly a process. I think it's something he's doing intentionally to ensure that Vader does stay pissed off at him and angry at something. So,
then he rubs it in his face a little bit too, because then we find out that Tagge survived the Death Star. Yeah, and he's been promoted, and Tagge just rubs it in. Well, first of all, Palpatine rubs in Vader's face that now, Tagge was one, and we saw this in A New Hope. Tagge didn't like the idea of a Death Star. He has a very different perspective on that. It was more of he thinks a massive fleet is far more effective to control the galaxy than a singular weapon. And now Palpatine is saying, okay, well, we're going to give some credence to that. We're going to say, okay, Tagge, and we're going to make him a Grand General, which he reminds Vader of clearly. And he's in charge. Vader, you'll be second in charge. And you need to go report to him. He is going to be your new Tarkin, basically. So he's now holding the leash of Vader. And it's just another one of those moments of just kicking him down a notch and saying, you are not the top of the food chain. And I am firmly in control. And there is a whole other list of people who I will put in control of you if you continue to fail.
Right. Which is just, it's shameful, honestly, because you think about Vader, and I'm not even disputing I'm not disputing whether or not this is even credible or it should have happened or not. All I'm saying is assume that it is. And you've got somebody like Anakin Skywalker, a general, right? He didn't lose any of that experience. Tactically, he's strong. His ability to fly, he's got all these great abilities, and yet he's got somebody like Tagge who gets put in charge of him. It's got to be demeaning for him, right? To suddenly have to report to this guy. Tarkin was probably a little different. I think there was a mutual respect there. We kind of got that, and I don't even want to go back to the EU books, but just from if you just take the movies themselves, and you hope, you kind of get the sense that they were, friends, for lack of a better term. There was definitely a mutual level of respect there. But with somebody like Tagge, this guy's just a a-hole the entire time, and he's not shy about it. There's a great exchange at one point when he's talking about Tarkin, and Vader fires back and says, I forget the line now about
Tarkin had vision, you have graphs.
Yeah, right.
And then
Tarkin
Tagge
had vision, you had graphs, right?
And he had a fantastic retort. Tagge said, I have graphs and command.
Yeah.
So
in your face, Vader, right?
Yeah, just trading jabs.
Yeah, but I mean, now he's reporting to this guy who he could crush literally in a second, which, well, spoiler alert, he does later down the road. Finally does away with him. But we should probably explain the idea here with Tagge too. For those of you who don't know, obviously until this comic book came out, we all just assumed that he died in the Death Star, and it turns out that he actually left to go check the rebel base on Dantooine that Princess Leia had said that that's where they were, and obviously she lied. We know that she lied. He was dispatched to go check that out. So when the Death Star blew up, he is actually on his way back from Dantooine, which is why he survived and why we see him here. So because it is a little shocking when you see his face in the comic book. You're like, well, what the heck? Where did this guy come from? I thought they all died on the Death Star, but it's plausible, right? Could have happened. Cool. But yeah. So anyways, so a good point about the general ranking now that he has as well. So he's back on a short leash. And definitely Tagge is very committed, very loyal to the Emperor, and doesn't really, doesn't pull any punches when he's talking about Tarkin and Vader at all. So I want to come back real quick too, because we're talking a lot about Vader and his relationship with the Emperor and how verbally abusive he is, that kind of thing, how shaming he is. But it's interesting to think about this because in just a few years, we go from what we're seeing now to friends in Return of the Jedi. There's at least 3 lines in Return of the Jedi where Palpatine refers to Vader as his friend, my friend, right, my friend, that kind of thing. But it just seems like do you think there was enough redemption? And we certainly get some of that within The Empire Strikes Back because they put the rebels on their heels pretty much the entire movie. But do you feel like that's out of character, or do you think they're going to maybe explain more? Do you think there is more? And maybe whether or not they explain it or not, but do you think there's more there where some of this healing happens? Because it just seems like, again, in Return of the Jedi, he seems like a different kind of character. It's not the same relationship we're seeing now.
Right. I mean, and you brought up Snoke and Kylo Ren, which I think is a good analogy there. It's this it's this manipulative game that he plays. So whenever he needs to build him up in whichever way that is most effective at that time, whether it's his wrath or it's his support and friendship, if you will, and like we saw in Revenge of the Sith, he's going to use those tactics. I mean, Palpatine is a very flexible guy in order to say what's most effective at this moment. And when things are going well, I imagine that he's probably one of those guys clapping you on the back a little bit, saying, "Great job," and we've really got him now. I mean, not so, ineloquently, but
yeah,
he's one of those guys who, when it's going well, everything's going into plan. He's got a smile on his face. He's cackling, and the world is everything is going to spec and it's perfect. But when it falls apart, you are going to hear about it, and everybody's going to know about it and hear about it. And so he's kind of got this pendulum swinging back and forth about which face is he going to show today. And again, you don't have to be ruthless when everything's going your way.
So one of the, in addition to obviously, okay, so the Death Star, let me just kind of set the stage here. So in addition to obviously the Death Star being blown up, and now we've got the Emperor and Vader relationship, but Vader is really the other, I guess, main storyline that's happening in this comic book, apart from the aftermath of A New Hope, is you have Vader that's now become obsessed, and it's very small early on, but it continues to grow as the series goes on. He's obsessed in trying to find this Force-sensitive user. He goes so far as to make a couple of decisions without consulting the Emperor in any way, that he needs to build an army, and he wants to start doing whatever he needs to do to find who this Force-sensitive person is. And there's a couple different things. There's a lot of different threads that we're probably not going to touch on, but just know that at some point they do make their way back to Geonosis. And the reason they go back there is because they're trying to find he wants to build a droid army. And these droids, obviously, are the droids from the Clone Wars. In that process, he comes across one of the, I guess, more one of the characters I think that's really become super popular in Doctor Aphra, who is I guess she's kind of like an Indiana Jones. She's a droid archaeologist, I guess is what they've got her labeled as.
Right. She's some sort of archaeologist. Yeah.
So at some point, he comes, they cross paths, and he enlists her help to go start building these droid army. And she knows a lot about droid archaeology. And later on we'll get more of her story, but she's basically just a tool to kind of get this started. But do you feel like it was very interesting that he did these things, like, again, building a droid army. He went after anyone and everyone that had, there's a cool sequence in the comic book where he's trying to talk about all, how far, to what lengths he went through just to find Dr. Aphra, because he needed this army, which again would play into the ultimate goal of him finding Luke, who obviously doesn't know Luke just yet.
Right.
But with like Aphra and this little side quest that he's going on, why do you think he didn't just go to Emperor Palpatine and say, hey, you know what? The guy that blew up the Death Star, I think he is our first priority. He's force sensitive. I sense something, whatever that is. And I really think we need to dedicate a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of our resources into finding him. Why do you think he didn't go with that approach as opposed to what he ended up doing, which is doing a lot of this stuff all on his own, under the covers or under the table kind of thing? He never even mentioned it to the Emperor at all. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think some of it, the initial confrontation in the very first issue, as Vader leaves, a cyborg whose name is Silo 4 comes in and has a secret discussion with Palpatine, and Vader is excluded. And Vader is very uneasy about that relationship right away. And so he starts to try to research of what's going on there. And he's already feeling the pressure that he's on the way out. And so he's already got this sense of betrayal, I think, starting to calculate and form in his mind. And as we move through the issues, we start to see that manifesting itself, because all of a sudden now we do see replacements. These aren't, successors. These are actual replacements, because the Silo 4 guy is he is a cyborg. They're evolving humans into technological beings, and that are superior to humans in any kind of way. So we think General Grievous on steroids, if you will, or a more human version of General Grievous. And he's confronted with these, with these new characters and he doesn't understand it. He feels, all of a sudden he feels this need that he's got to go and start pooling these resources together, because there's a tide. And what's not clear though is he actually thinking he needs to use this against the Emperor and that it would be effective? I don't know about that though, because it seems like this isn't a grand army, but some of the resources that they find. So when he finds Aphra, she has reacquired the 000 matrix, which is an ancient technology that is deemed too dangerous. And so
it mentioned centuries old, which was interesting.
Right. It's basically a homicidal droid matrix is what it is. That it feeds and it's excited about torture and about killing things and dismembering and all the nasty things you would think now that it's Halloween that we would want to watch on TV. And so that is an essential part of it, because between that and then BT-1, who's basically a fully armed astromech droid, like beyond all belief. I think they call it a blastomech.
Yeah, blastomech. That's
right. And so that's the makings of this droid army, and then they can influence what turns out to be the assassin droids from the Clone Wars that they see from Geonosis. But the driving force behind it, I don't know that he actually. It's really unclear whether he thinks he'll actually do a confrontation, but I think he's very much getting into a defensive posture that he needs something to back him up. Because one man you can only stem the tide for so long by yourself. And Aphra is not a warrior. She's very creative and very, very wildy. She can do a lot of things and very crafty, but she's not going to fight a war for you.
I guess you've kind of hit on 000. So 000 is So eventually there's a protocol droid, and that 000 matrix goes into it. And I mean, just this droid is like sick. Like he's got some problems. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it's super dark, like darker than probably anything we've ever really seen in Star Wars, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely.
At least in the Disney era.
Yeah.
But yeah, he's crazy. I mean, he's a masochist and just enjoys the torturing aspects of all of this stuff. And there's some comic relief too. And the way it's drawn, like LaRocca, a lot of times when he's drawing 000 and BT1, they're very much exact poses of R2D2 and C3PO. So it's hard to not see those two characters in these two characters. And then when they start speaking and when they start doing things in the comics, it's very jarring because this is not C3PO and R2D2 whatsoever. So 000 and then BT1, which is he's the blastomech droid. He's a homicidal maniac. In fact, I think they even mentioned that as part of the Tarkin initiative, he killed everybody on his base. Aphra and 000 I guess they reactivate him. And so these two characters become droids of Darth Vader and Aphra. There's a moment in there where they kind of swear their allegiance as masters to them. And they become their kind of right-hand droids, right-hand men, so to speak. But going back to Doctor Aphra, again, she's a hugely popular character now. She's got her own comic series, that kind of thing. But just in this initial 6 comic arc, what are your first impressions of her as a character?
Well, I like that she's got this. Well, she likes to ramble a lot, which I can definitely relate to.
Yeah,
but we probably both can. But she just rambles. She's got this really glib type of. It's not positivity. I think she's a lot. I don't know, she seems like she's always on her own, and she's always got to watch her back. And anytime she's around someone, she just can't help it. She's got to just talk. Just continue talking. But it's got this really, comedic sense to it. But you also see that she has got a lot of survivability skills and things that things that she can do to keep herself alive. And she admits it to Vader a couple of times. She knows that she should already be dead by now. Somehow she's not. And she knows like her usefulness to Vader is on a timeline. And of course, then she starts joking how she wants to die. She does not want to be jettisoned into space if she has a choice. Lightsaber through the neck, I believe, was the death of choice, something quick and painless. Which, of course, if she really irritated Vader to no end, he would probably make it somewhat painful. But I like the character, though. It's cool to see a strong female character that has this very adventure sense that is getting into things, but also has some crazy way of getting out. Now, granted, I've read all of the comics since this, or most of the comics since this, so I know how her character evolves. But we're getting these flavors of how she's going to behave later on. But we don't always know what side she's on either, because she's clearly out for herself. But does she have like a Han Solo heart of gold type of thing, or is she just out for money? We don't really get a great sense of that quite yet.
Yeah, we don't. And it can go either way, honestly. I think there's moments in there where you look at her and go, oh, she's really a good guy. And 2 minutes later in the comic books, she doesn't really come across that way. Resourcefulness is a trait, I think, that's probably a good characteristic of her.
Absolutely.
And I think Vader mentions the fact that the reason why she's alive and the reason why he's kept her alive or kept her around is because she is resourceful and
she's useful. Yep.
She's useful, right? And he kind of foreshadows something and says that in this particular arc that says, at some point, don't ever cross me, because the minute you're not useful to me, hey, you may get that lightsaber in the back of your neck. So, yeah, I think it's a great character. It's a very interesting character. Certainly not a character I would have expected to evolve the way she does. So without getting into spoilers there. But again, it's cool that she has gotten her own comic book and again, hugely popular. So if you guys are interested in Aphra, I think she comes out in issue 3 is when she's introduced.
Right.
And then she becomes a staple of the series for a while anyways. So yeah, so we were kind of talking about this little army that Vader is kind of putting together for either the sake of truly going after Luke Skywalker or in building a better defense and maybe preparing for the inevitable where he maybe assumes that Palpatine will finally do him in at some point. But we do get to it goes so far as to these potentials, these characters we were kind of talking about earlier. So while this is all kind of going on, we get the sense that Palpatine has been building up his own little brood group of replacement people to replace Vader at some point. And there's two of them that wield lightsabers, but they're not force sensitive. There's someone who's got a bunch of droids, or these little like hovering droids. But do you feel like any of these characters would have really truly been replacements for Vader, or do you think this was just another way of getting under Vader's skin and putting this group of ragtag rejects, I guess, or lack of a better term here, in front of him?
I viewed it all as short-term alternatives to Vader should he have to put him down. And because, none of them are really, they're kind of like glorified bounty hunters from a skill perspective, but they don't have any kind of experience yet. Now, they've been training for the better part of, I don't remember how many years he said that these were going on for. I'm guessing probably 10 to 20 years. But they don't have any real life experience either. But no, none of these seemed like Vader was actually handling all of them. So they get into like a one-on-one duel with him. Each one is taking their shots at him, and no one's really doing much. And Vader seems to be handling it all with ease. They have skill, but they don't have the force. And man, Vader is he is like liquid hatred of what these things are. He calls them blasphemous, I believe. But the only, none of them really are competitive against him. And Commander Carbon was an interesting one because he actually looked like General Grievous. He was inspired by General Grievous, specifically by Cylon 5, who was the iteration once Vader killed Silo 4. So it's a little bit crazy there, but none of them really seem like they're Vader. They can't do what Vader can do. They are somewhat arrogant in what they can do. And they just firmly believe that they're the next evolution of whatever monstrosity they've built is. But I don't know that Palpatine's really bought into it either. He wants the demonstration, but everything's a tool. Everything has their place. Everything has their usefulness. And so he'll keep them around because they might be useful, even if they're cannon fodder.
Yeah. I never got the sense. Yeah, I'm with you there. Like, these guys just seem like really it was another ploy, another tactic to get under Vader's skin, because I think, Vader obviously I don't think he ever truly believes that they would ever be able to replace him outside of, Palpatine stepping in and doing something to put him in a state where he couldn't defend himself. But I mean, he pretty much dispatches these guys pretty quickly early on, and they end up becoming part of the main series too. So even though they are his replacements later on, and if we ever come back to this, we may talk about it, but they actually do become some of the more main characters in this story arc as well.
Right, because Palpatine orders, he says, you guys are not to fight one another. And if you do, I better not find out about it.
Oh, yeah. He makes it. Yeah, that's right. He makes that comment. I don't want to know about it, kind of thing. So not off limits. Just don't tell him. Don't tell Dad the kids are fighting, kind of thing. All right. So let's get back to, I guess, Luke Skywalker, because that is, early on, we don't really get a whole lot here in terms of the efforts that he's going through to find him. But I guess do you feel like there, at least early on in the series, when he's going after Luke, do you get the sense at all that he knew anything more other than the fact that he was force sensitive?
Well, when he's chasing him on the Death Star trench, no, it doesn't seem like we get anything from there. And if you just read the Vader comic, they give you some panels there that they will do a little bit of flashback. In the main Star Wars title, I believe it was issue 1 and 2, and I think specifically 2, they actually have a confrontation. And Vader actually has the lightsaber in his hand at one point, and he starts to put it all together of what Obi-Wan was saying, the kid at the Death Star, when he's looking at this kid in the face, and then he sees his lightsaber in his hand. It all starts to have a bunch of questions. And so when he recruits Boba Fett to figure out who this is, it's just a matter of time before everything starts to piece together. But this was an important part for us to see, though, because it was we didn't know that they had a confrontation between these movies. It was never hinted at all. Well, I guess there was an Obi-Wan can't save you this time or something like that. But we didn't really have much of a hint about what was going on though, about how he figured that out. But now we do. You have the confrontation. He has the lightsaber, and now he's going to get some information from Boba. And Boba has a confrontation with Luke in the other series as well. So this is where the ping-ponging between the series is a little challenging sometimes to keep up with if you're just saying, I just want to learn about Vader.
Right. Well, and the way it ends, honestly, this particular the arc, I thought was the best moment really of all of the comics in all 6 issues. The very last 4 or 5 pages is probably the best stuff, because there's a scene there where Boba Fett comes back and Vader asks him, "Hey, do you have any information for me?" And he's like, "No, I don't have anything outside of the name." And the minute he
got away.
Yeah,
Vader,
he got it right.
Yeah, Vader warned Boba Fett, "Do not fail me, because I will not suffer that lightly." And so Boba Fett kind of did fail him a little bit, but he had a redeeming moment.
Yeah. But the minute he mentions his name, Skywalker, it's really cool because we start getting these flashbacks from the movie. He starts thinking back about, Padme telling him that, she was pregnant. And then, it then flashes over to him thinking about it. And he's starting to you can just see it. The wheels are spinning in his head like, holy crap, I have a son. That jerk lied to me. And then they even show a couple of the panels about, in your rage, you killed Padme. What about the kid? That kind of thing. He's replaying all of that in his mind. It's all hitting him at once. Even goes into like at the very end where, it talks about, he flashes back to Padme's death and flashes back to the trench battle, flashes back to one panel where, unless you've read the Star Wars comic, means nothing to you. And then finally he knows that, he says something like, I have a son. And the very next shot, it's really cool because this entire time he's just kind of been staring out on his ship, the Executor, and looking out the window, and it cuts the glass and it's completely cracked. In his hate, he's just been trembling. I guess in his anger, he's been trembling so much that it's kind of started breaking the glass itself.
Yeah, in each of these flashback panels, you get little cracks forming in various spots through these panels where you can see the window behind him. And then you're right, whenever you get the pull back and you get the full visual, the whole window is just, it looks like it's about ready to give.
Yeah. So it's got some, and there are other moments in here, like we didn't touch on some of their stuff. There's some really cool things. There's a scene where, before we kind of wrap up here, there early on in the comic book, he ends up going back to Jabba's palace, and you could argue, well, wait a minute, did we really need to see that? But I thought it was interesting enough for him that he goes back, and the way it's shot, the way it's drawn, it's very reminiscent of Luke's entrance into Jabba's palace in Return of the Jedi. There's that moment. We get Padme's ship back. There's a couple. We come to find out he's actually been using it this entire time.
A gift. Yeah, it was a gift from Palpatine, I believe.
Yeah. So
he keeps prodding him with these with these gifts and these other things that have just got to be tearing him apart.
There was, I think I mentioned it early on, but when they go to Geonosis, there is Karina the Great. So I forget now the episode in Rebels where they have the egg and we get click clack and all that.
Yeah, it was the horror inspired episode.
Yep.
The undead Geonosians.
Yeah, the dead Geonosians, but we get the Click-Clack who's allowed to keep the egg in that Rebels episode, and come fast forward in this comic book, we get to see what came about of that egg, and that becomes the Queen, Karina the Great. So that was kind of a neat little scene in there. We got Space Whales. I know Mike's a huge fan of those, so if he hasn't read it, I'm sure he'll enjoy it. But there are other moments in this comic series that just little tidbits here and there that they're kind of like, oh, that's interesting. Kind of thing that we didn't really touch on because they don't really play too much into the main storyline. But I guess overall, we'll end on this question of whether or not do you feel like this was a must-read type Star Wars arc? And then maybe the same question for the series, because I think it's obvious that the series is, but anyways, just thoughts on whether or not this is something that you would recommend if someone said, hey, I want to jump into the Star Wars universe now that Disney's taken over. Would you send them here first, or would you send them like to the 2017 version? Would you send them to the Star Wars main title?
Yeah, if you're looking for the original trilogy era and you feel like you were missing things between the movies, then yes, I think you've got to read the early stages of the Star Wars comic, and I think you need to read at least this series of the Vader comics. Probably the first, I don't know, 10 or 12 issues, I think are probably the most important. But yeah, if you really need that content, this is going to give you that sense of what's going on with the Emperor. Why is, he's in the background all the time, but what is happening that's moving all of our pieces forward as we get into Empire Strikes Back. And if you need to see what is fueling Vader's rage and his hate, especially as he gets into Empire Strikes Back, where he's torturing Han Solo, like what drives someone to do that? This is some of the stuff that's doing that and contributing to it. So I think from that perspective, if those are things that are interesting to you and you want to see some new characters along the way, this is definitely must read. If you don't care about those things so much, I think it's a worthy read in order for all the same things. Like you can see what's happening to contribute to these characters, and you might find that you actually start to enjoy some of that, and maybe in a way that you wouldn't expect otherwise.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there's enough here. I think they've done a better job. Disney's done a better job with the comic series than maybe like Dark Horse. And that's not a knock on Dark Horse, because there's a ton of stuff. Like the Tales of the Jedi stuff was awesome for me. Even Dawn of the Jedi, when that series came out, I was really into that because it was just stuff that we'd never seen before. So credit to Dark Horse for what they did. But I just think that with the Marvel stuff, and the reason why we're covering it is because there is stuff here that I think is significant enough. There are some really compelling characters, like Aphra, like 000, BT-1. There's some great characters that have come about. We didn't even talk about the bounty hunter, the Wookiee bounty hunter.
Yeah, Black Chrysanthemum.
Yeah, Black Chrysanthemum. He's awesome. And he showcases a little bit later in this series as well. So again, there's really, without spoiling too much, there's probably not a whole lot here, again, that's going to really pull on the main story arcs or the movies and that kind of thing. But there's enough here that kind of help fill in that gap. And I know we've talked about the fatigue of this era as well as being a factor. So, definitely if you're over fatigued in the Rebel Alliance era, this is maybe not the best place to start, but I think you'd be selling yourself short by not going out and picking up at least the main title, and definitely the Vader 2017 series, because there's some really cool, compelling stuff that's already come out, and there's stuff that we're still finishing up when we start talking about like the Fortress on Mustafa. Oh, too many Disney, too many Disney IPs in my head right now. Mustafar, but anyway, so yeah, I definitely would recommend this comic series to anyone that's interested as well.
Yeah, so, I mean, look, when you get a 6-issue arc here, you have to be willing to accept the comic tropes where you have ancillary stories that you're probably not going to be as interested in, but it's always useful to pay attention, because what they like to do in the comics is they do like to pull from those little details, and then they do something with them later on, which I think is interesting about the comics. And they have this very unique take on it all their own that is really difficult to do in movies, is difficult to do in books or a one-shot book, unless you have a series of books like in the Legends, the New Jedi Order did a lot of that, where they would pick up elements from previous books several books ago. And if you like that type of storytelling and you like those types of Easter eggs and making things like that important, then the comics are really for you, because those really do a great job of that, and you can visualize what's going on. And these creative teams love Star Wars, and they love telling these stories, and they know it really, really well. So you don't have a lot of continuity problems, but you also get a lot of visual things in the panels that are just stunning to look at, and also give you a little Easter egg items, every now and again, which are it's just fun. This is comics are supposed to be fun. And I think this one does a really good job of that. I think this is a great read for the first 6 issues.
Yep. Yeah, I would agree there. All right. Well, we'll end it on that note. Hopefully you guys enjoyed our take, at least on the comics, and depending, let us know what you think one way or the other. We can certainly change things up if you guys want us to dive a little bit deeper, or, really kind of, we're trying not to walk through, every single thing in the comic panel by panel. So, there's other outlets to do that. So let us know what you think of how we tackled this. And I think we definitely, either way, are probably going to do a couple more here in the comic book era. as well in some of the upcoming future episodes. So we'll be back next week with another show. But until then, I want to say a quick congrats to Bad Gamers Anonymous, who is now on iHeartRadio. So welcome to the club there, which is huge because it does take a while to get into that stupid thing. I don't know why. No offense to iHeartRadio. We have a lot of listeners. I shouldn't have said that. We have a lot of listeners on iHeartRadio. So yeah, no offense to them, but yeah, congrats to those guys for getting on there as well. Just as a reminder, we are part of the Earglue Media Network of podcasts. So please check out the website, eargluemedia.com. You can find links to all of the shows, including Bad Gamers Anonymous, The Basement, obviously our show. And eventually we've got a couple other shows that are in the works. People are hard at work at getting those cranked out. So you'll see a few new ones. We've got them listed, right? That's not a secret anymore on the website?
No, it's not a secret. Yeah, we've got the Manny Faces of Masters of the Universe, a He-Man podcast that Mike is doing, and you and I are both pitching in on that one as well. So that's a little bit different flavor of the toys, the cartoons, the comics. Just kind of a nice change of pace, but
yeah,
kind of
it's
a
all nice
until
he gives you Faker as the character that you're supposed to help cover with.
Epic.
Yeah. But yeah,
we want to give a special shout out to Gus from Chicago. He sent us an email with a bunch of cool pictures of a Red 5 ski helmet that he did. Gus, go join Discord so you can share that with everybody. But want to give him a quick shout out too for all the kind words he had and for sharing his hard work with us.
Yeah, it was humbling. Very cool. And then finally, if you guys want to find us, you can find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at the Cantina Cast or / the Cantina Cast. Send email to cantinacastfaml@gmail.com. Please, write a good review if you like what you're hearing on iTunes. You can find us on Discord. We'll put the link for that in our show notes. That's a easy way, quick way to get access to all of the creators, all of the podcasters you hear, not only on Cantina Cast, but on Earglue Media as well. And then we'll have links in there for Patreon and TeePublic if you want to go the extra mile and support us in that way. And with that, I think that's going to do it. Any final thoughts before we get head out?
Nope. Don't fail me again, Albert.
All right. Try not to. We'll see you guys next week.
See ya.
You're still listening? Wow. That's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.